In South Asia, faith and power are locked in this incredible dance that, it shapes the lives of billions. It's really a story of modern nations being built on top of ancient beliefs. So today, we're going to put on our sociologist hats to really understand why this connection is so powerful and, frankly, so explosive. And this isn't just some abstract academic question, right? This stuff shapes elections, it shapes laws, and it shapes how people see themselves across the entire region. So why? Why, in an age of what are supposed to be modern, secular states, does faith seem to have such a powerful grip on public life? Well, to get to the real answer, we've got to look way deeper than the 24-hour news cycle. All right, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to rewind and look at the colonial roots of the modern state. Then we'll check out the specific nation-state template that everyone adopted. After that, we're going to challenge a really common and maybe wrong way of thinking about this. Then we'll dive into some fascinating examples from the ground. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with the big takeaways. Okay, so our story doesn't actually begin today. It starts in the past. To get why religion and politics are so tangled up now, we have to start with the colonial powers who, literally drew the maps and wrote the first rule books.
And here is the central irony. It's just fascinating. The very leaders who were fighting for freedom were basically using a playbook written by their colonizers. Their ideas of what a modern nation should even look like, all these concepts like democracy and nationalism, were largely Western imports. They were building brand new countries, but using a foreign blueprint.
This timeline really puts it all into perspective. I mean, look at how fast all of this happened. The jump from colonial rule to these independent nations happened in a flash, right after World War II. This wasn't some slow, centuries-long evolution. It was more like a political big bang. And you know what? We are still feeling the aftershocks today. So independence wasn't a blank slate. Not at all. These new nations had to plug into a global system that already had its own set of rules. They were essentially handed a template for what a modern country was supposed to look and act like. And this created what sociologists call double accountability. See, on one hand, they had to answer to the global community, join the UN, follow all the international norms. But on the other hand, they also had to answer to their own people, promising democracy and a constitution. And right there, from day one, that creates this fundamental tension. This concept is absolutely key: double accountability. Just think of it as this constant tug of war. You've got global expectations pulling from the outside and the incredibly complex demands of diverse populations pulling from the inside. This balancing act is right at the very heart of South Asian politics. And this tension just explodes when you get to the idea of secularism. The ideal from the West, what you see on the left, is this neat, clean separation of church and state. But the reality in South Asia, over on the right, well, it's a tangled web. You couldn't just tell people to erase centuries of their religious and community identity. Of course not. Those identities demanded a seat at the political table.
Okay, so this brings us to a really important shift in how we're analyzing this. How should we actually view this persistence of religion in public life? Is it a problem to be solved, or is it something else entirely?
So the common label you always hear is communalism. Politics based on religious identity. And usually this is framed as a big failure. The argument you hear is that it's a sign that a society just isn't modern enough. Or even worse, that it's just a bunch of cynical politicians stirring up religious feelings to win votes. But the sociological approach totally flips the script. Instead of judging religion and politics as a problem, it just treats it as a social fact. It asks why it's happening, not that it's happening. So the goal isn't to say it's irrational or bad, but to really understand its deep roots in a specific time and place. All right, so let's take this sociological lens and actually apply it. What does it show us when we zoom right in on the ground? Well, as we're about to see, there's absolutely no single story for all of South Asia. It's way more complicated than that. And wow, this slide really shows you just how varied the situation is. I mean, take Sri Lanka, where we see the rise of what's called an ethnocracy, a state built around Buddhist Sinhala nationalism. Now jump over to Pakistan, where you have this strange paradox. The state itself uses Islam for its legitimacy, but actual religious parties almost always get crushed in elections. Then let's zoom into a single town like Kannauj in India, and we see that the local perfume trade creates these deep economic bonds that cut across religious lines, holding everyone together. And then way down in Kerala, we find Hindu nationalist groups who are less focused on winning elections and more on weaving themselves into daily life through cultural and religious rituals. We're talking 4 completely different dynamics here.
Let's just pause for a second on that word from the Sri Lanka example, ethnocracy. This is a really crucial idea. It's what happens when the machinery of the state gets captured by one ethnic or religious group, and then it's used to privilege them over everybody else. It fundamentally changes the answer to the question, who gets to be a true citizen?
So, as we start to pull all these different threads together, what are the most important things we should really take away from this super complex picture?
Okay, so here are the 4 big takeaways. 1, the colonial past, it isn't just history. It's like the deep root system that is still feeding the present. 2, that whole modern state idea isn't a neat blueprint. It's more like a basic frame that gets completely overgrown and reshaped by local realities. 3, religion is not just a tool that politicians use. It's a powerful current in society that can totally redirect the course of politics itself. And 4, and this is so important, the big picture view of national politics is often wrong. You really have to zoom in, get the magnifying glass out, to see what's actually going on.
And that brings us right to our final question. Because look, this isn't a closed chapter of history. This story is being written right now as we speak. You throw in globalization, huge economic shifts, rising nationalism, all of it is changing the relationship between faith, identity, and the state. So the only real question is, what comes next?